Welcome to the Collide Kids podcast, hosted by Kristen Clark. This is a show for kids and families. You are going to meet new people and have fun while you listen. Let's do it!
Hey y'all, welcome to the Collide Kids podcast. I'm your host, Kristen Clark. The Collide Kids podcast is a show for kids and families where we learn together how life and faith collide. If you're new, welcome. I am so glad you're listening today. Be sure to stick around to the very end. We have what's called the Kids Only segment, and that's where kids just like you get to be on the podcast. Well, I know I've said this before, but I have really had such a good time being a podcaster and a podcast host. It is so much fun, and I love meeting new people. That has really been the best part, to meet people and hear their stories. At first, I was just interviewing a lot of my friends, and I love that because I got to hear their stories and learn things about them that I didn't know. But as I continue, I keep getting to meet new people, and that's so much fun. And I'm meeting people from all over the United States, and now I can say from around the world. So I'm so excited for you to meet today's guest, and he is all the way from Australia. His name is Rodney Olsen. He spent much of his life working as a professional communicator and radio host at 98.5 Sunshine FM, a Christian radio station in Perth, Western Australia. After visiting Haiti and Dominican Republic in 2008, Rodney's burden to serve those living in extreme poverty began to grow. He then started working for Compassion Australia in 2013. He is very passionate about children being released from poverty in Jesus' name. He's traveled to a number of nations where compassion is working and has seen firsthand how Jesus is working through local churches. He's a blogger, podcaster, and a cyclist, which means he rides a bike like a really long distance. He has crossed Australia 6 times by bike, as well as cycling in Canada and India. Rodney begins his 7th crossing of Australia this September as part of Ride for Compassion Coast to Coast. I cannot wait for you to hear this story and all about his adventures cycling and doing all these different things with compassion. So here is my conversation with Rodney Olsen. Rodney Olsen, thank you so much for being on the podcast today.
It's absolutely my pleasure to be here.
And I can't tell you how much I love your accent. Where are you from?
I'm from Perth in Western Australia, so the far western side of Australia, and Australia is a very big country. So I'm on the far western side in the capital city of Western Australia.
That's awesome. So will you just start off by introducing yourself and tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do?
So you've already mentioned that my name is Rodney, and I work for an organisation called Compassion, and our task is to try and help children who are living in poverty in various places around the world. There are a lot of children that don't have the sorts of things that we have. Their homes aren't great, they don't have ready access to food, and they don't have an opportunity for an education. So I'm part of an organisation that is helping those sorts of children, and that's what I do. I'm married to my wife Pauline. We have 2 grown children, Emily, who's married to Josh, and our son James, who still lives at home with us as well.
Oh, that's awesome. So you are a bike rider. I can't wait to talk to you about all this stuff. Before we do, I always like to ask my guests to start out by sharing a joke. Since this is a podcast for kids, this is my kids' favorite part of the interview always, is hearing the funny jokes and things that people have. So what do you got for us?
Look, I'm not sure that I have a joke, but I'm wondering if I might help you out with a little friend of mine. He's very, very small.
Okay.
He's a mouse, in fact, and he can tap dance. Would you like my impersonation of a tap dancing mouse?
Yes, I would.
Okay, here we go. We'll see what we can do. So here we are. He's got to have some music to tap dance to, and off we go. I think we'll leave it there because he can tap dance all night.
What a skill he has. How did you figure out you could do that?
I really don't remember. It's been a bit of a party trick for way too many years.
Well, that's good. I love that. That was awesome. Okay, so tell us about what you do. You've ridden your bike many, many miles. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, many years ago, I heard that there were some people that were going to ride their bikes all the way across Australia. And it was for a good cause all the way back then. And I thought that's something I'd like to do, which is strange because I never really was very sporting when I was young, but it just was something that grasped my imagination.
Yeah.
So I thought I'd give it a go. And so I signed up for it. And so I rode across Australia and I raised some money for a very good cause. And then I did it again the following year. And I've done it a few more times since. And so I ended up having done that 5 times riding across Australia.
Wow.
And then when I started working for Compassion, I remembered all those bike rides and thought that is a good way to raise money for children who don't have enough, for children who live in poverty. And so I talked to the people at Compassion and said, hey, I've got an idea. I'd love to ride across Australia again and raise money for these children. And so we did that in 2018 and it was very successful. We raised a lot of money to help a lot of children and we decided we'd do it again. So in September this year, I'm going to get back on my bike with about 30 other cyclists and we're going to ride from one side of Australia all the way to the other side to raise money for children.
And how many miles did you say that was?
Well, I know it in kilometres, which is what we use in Australia. So that's just over 4,200 kilometres. I'm just trying to work out in my head how many miles that is, and I can't. So I'll leave you to figure that out.
I'll figure that out. Okay. That's amazing, though. It sounds like a really long trip, no matter what it is, if it's kilometers or miles.
It is. And each day we're going to be riding 28 days. And in amongst those 28 days, we'll have 5 rest days. But on the riding days themselves, each day we'll be averaging over 150 kilometres. So that's almost 100 miles each day. Wow. And there are some days that we'll ride up around 200 kilometres. So that's well over 100 miles on those days that we'll ride to get from one side of the country to the other.
That's amazing. So what is that like physically? Like, do your legs start to get tired? I feel like after I walk for a couple of, miles or my legs start to feel achy. So tell me about how that, as you're riding with your muscles and things like that.
It is very tiring, I can assure you of that, but it's one of those things where you need to train. So even though we're a little bit out from the bike ride, all the people that are taking part have already been doing a lot of kilometres or a lot of miles on their bicycles, and so that we're getting our muscles ready. You can never fully get ready for something as big as this because we don't have the time to just ride day after day after day until it actually comes up. And so we're doing as many kilometres as we can in the lead up, and so that helps. But yes, you get sore muscles when you train, and then when we get on the big ride itself, of course, we get very tired because we ride through the day and then we stop and we meet people in local towns, we meet people in local churches, and we tell them what we're doing and why we're doing it. Then we have a bit of a sleep, then we get up the next morning and we do the same all over again. So yes, our muscles get tired and we just keep reminding ourselves why we're doing what we're doing.
That's amazing. And for such a good cause too. So you've done this before, right? So what were some things that you loved about these long distance bike rides?
One of the things I love is being able to get up with a group of friends and have a common purpose, a common cause that we're all riding for, and then just keep riding. It's something that I enjoy doing, but you get to see the countryside. And even though right in the middle of Australia, it's fairly barren, there's not a lot going on out there. When you're going at that sort of speed, you actually start to see a lot of changes in the countryside as you go. So the sorts of things that you miss when you're going really fast in a car, you actually see. So you see a change in the sorts of bushes that are by the side of the road. And then there are those wonderful magic times. We were riding along one day in a group, and along one side of us, we saw an emu. And on the other side,
Wow.
we saw another emu, and they were running along beside us. And the
Wow.
group decided we're going to ride really fast and see how fast they could run. And I very quickly went to the front of the group and I said, no, we need to slow down, because sometimes emus can be very silly animals. And I just had in my mind that the emu on one side might look across and think, there's my friend, and just try and run through the middle of us. And that
Oh,
wouldn't have been
wow.
fun for us. So
Right.
we slowed down a little, and off we went. And so we had emus running alongside us for a while. And then after a while, they both turned off and they went their different ways. But we've also seen kangaroos. So groups of kangaroos
Wow.
bounding along the road beside us as we've been riding across Australia. And that's quite wonderful as well. So there are those magic moments when you see beautiful countryside that God has created. We see the wonderful animals that he has created, and we get to be out there with our friends. So there's some fairly magic times.
That sounds incredible. I can't imagine like riding along and all of a sudden you're looking at animals trying to keep up with you. That's so fun. So what about food? Like, do you eat while you're riding? Do you stop and take a break, or do you just kind of keep going until you get to your destination?
Well, I mentioned that we have around 30 riders, but we also have what we call a support crew. And these are people who travel in vehicles behind us or alongside us. And so the vehicles that are behind us, they have a big banner on the back that says, beware, there are cyclists ahead, so that the traffic knows that we're there.
Oh,
And they
that's
have
cool.
flashing lights. Yeah, because there's a lot of trucks across that road there, because they're carting all the things for the stores on one side of Australia across to the other side of Australia
Yeah.
to restock them. And so there are very large trucks. And so we have the banners with all the warnings on, and we have the flashing lights, and so they are behind us. And then there's some other vehicles with some more support people, and they go ahead. So when we leave in the morning, they go ahead quite a few kilometres, and they stop where we're going to have a break in the morning. And so they'll be there for our morning break, and we'll just ride in, and they'll already have food set up and some drinks for us to have. So we'll demolish that very quickly,
Yeah.
because you get very hungry on a bike. So we'll do that. And then off we go again, and they'll clean up what is left behind, and then they'll leapfrog us again. They'll go up ahead, and they'll go to the place where we're going to stop for lunch. And again, they'll pull out some tables and they'll set up lots of food, and we'll come in and we'll demolish the food again. And then they'll do the same for the afternoon break. And then finally we get to the local town that we're staying in for that night.
That sounds awesome. What a great thing that you have that support group for you.
It is wonderful, and we couldn't do the ride without them. And it's always a reminder to me that the wonderful things that we get to do or that we get to be a part of can only happen with all the parts working together. And sometimes we think, oh, I'm only playing a very unimportant part. But no, without that part, we wouldn't be able to do what we're doing. And when we come to the towns, the people in the towns at the local churches welcome us in, and they give us food for the night. And we couldn't get all the way across Australia if it wasn't for them as well. And they will give us a place to stay. And a lot of the times, that's just saying, here's our church. It's open for you. We'll leave you to it. And we put down mattresses and sleeping bags, and we sleep inside the churches. Or sometimes in some towns, they say, hey, we've got some spare beds at our home. You come to our home. And so we
Wow.
get split up amongst the various homes that are represented by that local church. And so they give us a place to sleep, and they give us food, and then they send us on our way. So they're an essential part of the team as well. And it takes
Yeah.
all those parts working together to make it happen. So it's not just those people that are doing the riding that make the difference for the children in poverty.
That's amazing. That sounds so fun too. Like when I was growing up, our youth group, we used to have what we called a church lock-in, where we got to put sleeping bags on the church gymnasium floor, and we all stayed in one big room, and it was like a big slumber party. So, but I can't imagine you guys stay up too late giggling and talking and things like that, you immediately want to go to sleep, right?
We always say to the people in the local towns that we love to tell them all about the bike ride, but we also remind them we've just had a long day on the bike. So if we start to nod off in the middle of a conversation, it's not because we find them boring, it's just that it's been a hard day. And so we try and get an early night. There are some people that are very good at staying up even later at night, and they'll talk and they don't need as much rest, but they're always helpful in that they will take their conversation to a place where it's not going to bother those of us who want an extra bit of sleep so that
Yeah.
we can get the rest we need. And then the task is, and it's almost like a race, I've got to say, we have to race each other to get to sleep so that we get to sleep before the snoring starts.
Oh, I'm sure yeah, you want to make sure you're out cold before someone starts to make those noises for sure.
That's right.
That's awesome. So tell us about compassion. Like, why are you doing this for compassion? We'll be right back after this. You know, raising kids in the digital age isn't easy, but Bark Technology makes products that help parents keep their kids safe online and in real life. They have an app, a phone, and a home device that lets families set parental controls on their internet-connected devices. I love the app because it helps us manage screen time and blocks websites and apps we want our kids to avoid. It also sends alerts and gives us the ability to monitor texts and social media and even track your child's location. Visit bark.us to learn more about how you can keep your kids safe online. Use the code COLLIDEKIDS to get 15% off your subscription of the Bark app.
Many years ago, when I was working in a previous job, I used to work as a radio announcer. And Compassion is an organization, as I said, that helps children who are living in poverty. And I had the invitation to go and see what they were doing in a country called Haiti. And so I traveled there. And what I found, because this was 2008, and at that time, something was happening called the global financial crisis, which also caused the global food crisis. Because when money is difficult to get hold of, then the price of everything goes way up.
Yeah.
And this is what happened. So the people in Haiti weren't able to buy food. Even the most basic of food, they weren't able to purchase for their families. And so they were starving. And we heard stories at that time that there were families who were mixing together dirt and oil and water and sugar and then drying it out to make mud pies and feeding that to their family just so that they could
Wow.
have something in their tummies. And so we knew we needed to make a difference. And it was a very difficult time that we spent in Haiti to see what was going on. And we had to leave there very quickly when people started demonstrating to say, we need food for our families. And as we were going down the runway to leave, as we were flying out, I had these two senses in mind. There was one that said, finally, we're safe, because there were some very dangerous things that were happening in Port-au-Prince, the capital of Haiti, that we needed to get away from. And I felt we're safe. But at the same time, I remembered that there were probably about 8 or 9 million people living in Haiti who could never afford an airline ticket to leave.
Yeah.
They were stuck with this. And I thought then, I've got to speak up on their behalf. They don't get the opportunity to be heard most of the time. So unless I speak up for them, then their stories won't be heard. And so I went back and I worked in radio for about 5 years until I saw a job with Compassion advertised. And I applied for that job, and I was very thankful that I got that job. So I've been working for Compassion now for over 7 years. And the reason is because I saw the work that was being done, and I knew that it made a difference for children living in poverty, and I wanted to be part of that and tell their stories.
I love that. And so my family sponsors a child through Compassion. We have for many years, and he's a young boy in the Dominican Republic, and we love hearing stories. We love getting his pictures and things like that. Can you tell us a little bit about what Compassion does for these kids and these families?
It's interesting that you sponsor a child in Dominican Republic, because there's the island there in the Caribbean where A third of it is Haiti, which is where we went first, and the other two
Yeah.
thirds is Dominican Republic. So it's the same island, but things are very different on those two sides. So when we found that we couldn't stay in Haiti any longer, we actually went and visited Dominican Republic, and we visited some of the children being helped there. And Compassion always worked with the local church because there's people there that know what the local situation is like. So they'll help to provide food for families that don't have enough. They'll provide education for children who otherwise wouldn't get that opportunity. They'll teach them things about hygiene and just about getting on with each other and how they do those sorts of things that they normally wouldn't get the opportunity to because they're living in extreme poverty. But also we get to tell them about Jesus. And that's a big part of what Compassion does. We share the gospel of Jesus Christ with the children, and that gives them an opportunity to decide, am I someone who's going to follow Jesus? And we see that that happens more and more through what we're doing in Compassion. But it was very interesting when I was in Dominican Republic. That's the first time I started to see children in their homes, to see what it was like for them. And they didn't have very much. But one of the things that was very precious to each of those children was the letters that their sponsors wrote to them.
Yeah.
Because sometimes we forget to write to our children, our sponsored children, and we think, oh, does it really make a difference? Well, I can tell you that if you're listening and your family sponsors a child, those letters are so precious. There's one girl I remember meeting, and she had done very well at school, and she was given an award by the president of Dominican Republic. So she didn't have a lot in her home, but she had a small box in which she kept her precious things. And in there was her award from the president of the country
Yeah.
and her letters from her sponsor. Those were the things most precious to her.
That's awesome. I love hearing that, because when you write a letter and you think, I don't know what to say, or I don't know if this matters, to hear that the kids really value these. And I will say, just recently, maybe in the past year or so, I downloaded the Compassion app on my phone. And so sometimes it is hard to remember to write the letter on paper and seal it and send it off, but I can write a letter through the app on my phone, and I can attach pictures and things like that, which I think if just to remember to do it, it's a little bit easier on our phones nowadays, I guess.
We are so used to communicating with
Yeah.
our phones or with our computers. And so Compassion has made it easier to be doing the same with our sponsored children, to be able to send them a note. And a lot of people are just like you. They say, I'm not sure what I should write. And yet we know the things that encourage us. We need someone to say to us, you know what, you're doing well. And I love you and God loves you. And it's those simple things that are put in a letter, just those simple things, and maybe a verse of scripture or two, that those children will read again and again. And I've met many children that have been sponsored, and they say that the letters that they have received from their sponsor, they keep and they read them over many years. They go back to them
Wow.
again and again because they are the words of life for them.
Wow, this has been a good reminder for me to write a letter. I haven't done it in a while, so I'm going to do that. So if you are listening right now and you have a sponsored child, I want to encourage you to write a letter today too. So tell us a little bit about why you think it's so important. Like people that they're not bike riders, they're not people that have a opportunity to ride a long distance trip to raise money. What are some things that we can do right now to help support Compassion or other ministries like that?
I guess the thing is that we can remind ourselves that we can do a whole range of things. I've heard of people that decide, you know what, I don't know that I can help a lot with children living in poverty because I don't know how to do that, but I can ride a bike. And so they'll do that. And the sorts of
Yeah.
rides that we're doing of various lengths, or others who say, I'm not sure that I can help in that way, but you know what, we can get our youth group together and we can wash cars and raise money that way. Or I heard of a young child one time who decided that they would get on a bike and just do laps of their local oval and that they would raise money that way. I know of someone who used to raise chickens and then sell the chickens And that was a way that they raised money. Or a lady who used to make some baked goods for local schools in the area and sell them for the school canteens. And the money that she raised would help children in poverty. There are things that we are good at, that God has given us skills in, and sometimes we don't recognize that those skills can be used for God's purposes and to reach out to children who desperately need to know that someone cares for them right now.
Yeah. And like you were saying earlier about the letters, like we know what are the things that would encourage us. And so for us to do those things for other people, even if it's very small, right? It's still important.
One of the most interesting things is that these days we live in an age where sometimes we get sad and sometimes we get discouraged, and we don't know how do we get out of this sense of discouragement and sadness. And you know what? God has made us in a very special way that it's when we're serving others that we're most alive. And
Mm,
I've heard many stories of people who say that they have had a very difficult time, that they've had a depression, and yet they've started to do something that looks outward instead of looking inward. They've started to do things for other people, and suddenly that lifts. Now, it's not going to be that way, a simple way of just helping others, and that will help in all situations. But it is one of those things that does help people to change their mood, because we were built to help other people. That's
right.
what the Bible tells us. That's what God tells us, that we were made to help others. So when we use the skills that God has given us to help others, we're more alive. We're more who we should be.
Absolutely. I totally agree. And it's like the Bible verse that says we're to love our neighbors. And that doesn't just mean our next door neighbors. We're to love the people around us, whether that's in close proximity in our town or whether that's a way that we have a connection with them through an international organization.
That's absolutely right. And we remember the story of the Good Samaritan in
Mm-hmm.
the Bible, where Jesus challenges a man and says, well, who is your neighbor really? And he tries to make up ways of skipping out on his duty. He says,
Yeah.
well, yeah, I'm not really sure. But Jesus comes back to him and says, well, actually, here's a story. And he tells the story of the Good Samaritan. And if you don't know it, look it up in your Bible. It's a really exciting story.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a story of couple of people that go past this man who's been beaten up, and they just ignore him. But another person comes along and says, I'm going to help. And they were a person that was a different religion. They were a person who was a different race, and all these things. There were lots of differences and lots of reasons that they might not have helped this man. But they decided, I've got to do it. They saw the need and they stepped in, and they spent some of their own money. And then they said, I'm going to keep coming back to the inn. They took the injured man to the inn and said, you look after him because you're the best person to look after him. But I'm going to keep coming back, and I'll give you money as I come by until the healing is complete. And we see this in practice with compassion. That's what we do. We have
Yeah.
the children at the local church, and we're not the best person to look after them, but we say, we're going to keep giving you the money that you need until the healing is complete. But the thing is, Jesus says in that story that you've got to love God with everything, with your heart and your soul and your mind. Love God with everything, and love your neighbor as you love yourself. And a lot of people, theologians, people who study the Bible, say that that's actually just a summary of the Ten Commandments, because some of the Ten Commandments are about serving God and the
Yeah.
others are about serving other people. And that's what it comes down to. So when we decide, I do need to love my neighbor as myself, we first of all say, well, how do I love myself? And we say, well, I make sure that I live in a good home. I
Mm-hmm.
make sure that I've got enough food to eat. I make sure that I've got some really good friends. And that's what I want for these people who are my neighbors, whether they're next door or whether they're on the other side of the world. And so we want that for them. That's how we love them. But also we know we have a very special relationship with Jesus. And we want that for our neighbors too, because that's part of loving ourselves, is getting to know Jesus and his will for
Mm-hmm.
our life. So we want our neighbor, either next door or across the other side of the world, we want them to know Jesus as well.
Yes, I love that. I love that story of the Good Samaritan. I hadn't thought about the innkeeper being the person that was the best person to take care of the person that was hurt.
That's exactly what happens. He knows that when he first sees that man beaten on the side of the road, he's got to take immediate action. And he takes what little action he can, which is to help him with the wounds that are obvious. And he puts him on the back of his animal and takes him to the inn because he knows he's not very good at being a doctor. And
Mhm.
in those days, the person who used to run the local inn was someone who could care for people. And so he took him to a place where he could be cared for. And again, as I say, that's what we do in compassion. We know that the best people to care for children in poverty are people in their local area who know the local circumstances. They understand the poverty because they're living in those sorts of circumstances too. And so
Mhm.
if they're going to offer help, then it's got to be them that are giving that help. So we resource the local church. We're like that Good Samaritan who says, here's some money,
Mhm.
here's a couple of days' wages, but we're going to keep coming back until the healing is complete.
Yeah, and I think like it's what you said before, we all can't do the same thing. Like that good Samaritan that helped that man, he wasn't able to be a doctor and take care of him and watch him all this time, but he could do his part and then give the resources, just like that's what compassion does. I love that illustration. Um, so for those that are listening right now that want to be a part of compassion, or they've never sponsored a child, or they've never given to this sort of thing, what would you tell them to do?
I guess there's two things. If people are interested in the bike ride and they would like to give towards that, knowing that the money is going to help children that Compassion serves, they can go to rideforcompassion.com, and the details about the ride and the opportunity to donate is there. But if they would like to know more about compassion generally, they can just go to compassion.com. If they go to compassion.com, then they're able to choose a child to sponsor. They're able to read about that child, get to know that child, and start writing them letters. And just like that Good Samaritan, say, I have something that I can offer that child. But the interesting thing is, you might find that that child actually makes a very big difference in your life,
Mm-hmm.
because it's really amazing when a child living in extreme poverty starts to pray for you. And that's what those children do. They pray for those of us who are sponsoring. And sometimes we can't see that our lives are filled with worries and concerns. And yet here they are, they're praying for us.
Wow, that's so incredible. And I love that it's so affordable to sponsor a child. I know of a small group or a Sunday school class that decided to combine their resources, and that whole class sponsored a child. So if your family can't do that, maybe your small group could do that, or maybe your baseball team could do that. There's lots of ways that people can contribute, because it's not very expensive, but like you said, it makes such a big impact. And it's so incredible to know that we can pray for them and give them the resources, but that they also pray for us. That's so beautiful.
One of the most amazing men that I've ever met. His name is Richmond Wandera. He's from Uganda, and he was a very poor young child. He lived in a slum because his father had been murdered, and so he lived with his brothers and sisters and his mother in a slum house. And he used to have to go out on the street to try and find food. Well, someone decided to sponsor him through Compassion, and that person that decided to sponsor him was a 15-year-old girl who took a babysitting job so that she could afford to help, because she
Wow.
knew that there was a need there and she didn't have a way to fill that need. And so she went and got herself a part-time babysitting job to help. And so that's how he got his start really in life, to leave poverty, to change his life. And you know what? That man, Richmond Wandera, is now the pastor of the local church where he first became a sponsored child.
Mm,
And more than that, he has started something called the Pastors Discipleship Network to
wow.
teach and mentor pastors from all across areas in Africa. And they're currently working with around 5,000 pastors in Africa. So you imagine the many churches that are represented by those 5,000 pastors. We're talking about thousands, perhaps hundreds of thousands of people that are being affected by the teaching that comes through Richmond, through these pastors and to them. And all of this started because a 15-year-old girl said, this is not acceptable. I cannot see this child remain in poverty, and I'm going to do whatever it takes to make a difference in his life. And she had no idea
Yeah.
she was going to affect hundreds of thousands of people.
That's incredible. How could you not want to be a part of something like that? You think you're just helping the one, but you don't know the impact of what that one child could have in his community and around the world. That's incredible. Well, this has been so great, Rodney. I so appreciate you meeting today and interviewing. We're in different time zones right now, so we're doing this interview. It's 9:30 in the morning here in Georgia, and it's a different time where you are, right?
It's 9:30 at night here in Perth, Western Australia.
There
We
you
are on
go.
opposite sides of the world.
We are. That's incredible. So that's really cool. Well, thank you so much for doing this. I always like to ask my guests before we sign off to share a memory from when they were a kid. So do you have a memory you want to share with us today?
I was the youngest of 5 children growing up. So we had mum and dad and the 5 of us children, and I was the very youngest. And I don't know quite why, but when it came time for me to get a bicycle, I didn't end up getting a bicycle. So all my brothers and sisters, they got bicycles and they knew how to ride a bike, but I didn't. And so I taught myself to ride a bike, not when I was 8 or 9 or anything like that, but when I was 16 years of age. And so that's something that I very much remember, that I didn't even learn to ride a bicycle till I was 16 years of age. But I think I've made up for it since with all the bike riding that I've done. And I think that that's a reminder. Sometimes we think that there are things that we can't do, that we'll never be able to do. But you know what? If we set our mind to it, if it's something that God has skilled us to do, then that's something that we can do, and we can do it for God.
I love that. That's amazing. And I can imagine that was a pretty wobbly first experience trying to ride a bike when you're 16 years old.
No one expects a 16-year-old to be just learning to ride a bicycle. So I tried to do it as privately as possible. We lived on a slight hill, so I would get on a bike, my brother's old bike, and I would roll down the hill so that I could get my balance, so that I had enough speed. And we lived near a very big shopping centre. And so I would ride around in the car park there on weekends when there were no cars. And that's how I learnt to ride a bike before I ever went on the road to ride a bike.
That's amazing. I can't imagine. And you said the car park, so we call that the parking lot, right?
That's correct,
Okay,
yes.
just making sure. I love that we both speak English, but we have different words for things, right?
There are lots of different words that we have, and I've tried to be careful, but I know that there are lots of words that we say in Australia that mean a different thing in America and in other parts of the world. And for you, there are things that you say that have a very different meaning in Australia. And you would say it and someone would look and think, that's a strange thing to say, but it's not. It's normal in different places of the world. And it's just a wonderful reminder of how we're all different.
That's right. But we're still all part of the body of Christ, and we're still all neighbors, right?
Very much so.
Well, thank you so much for doing the show today. I so enjoyed hearing your story. And like you said, if people are interested in being a part of Compassion, they can go to compassion.com, and then your bike ride experience will be at Ride for Compassion.
Yes, rideforcompassion.com. If they go to rideforcompassion.com, they can click the donate button and donate directly, or they can scroll down if they'd like to get in touch with me. My email address is at rideforcompassion.com. They can get in touch with me and ask me any more questions they'd like to about the bike ride.
Amazing. Wow, can you imagine riding your bike that far? Okay, so I did the math, and by doing the math, I mean I looked it up on Google, and 4,200 kilometers is actually 2,610 miles. I think that's pretty impressive. That's amazing. That's like going from Atlanta, Georgia, which is where I live, all the way to Oregon, which is across the country on the other side of the country. So that's pretty far. I don't know about you, but I just loved hearing the stories about the animals, like the emus and the kangaroos and all the different things he got to see as he traveled on his bike ride. It's just amazing. And I love that they had this support crew that went along with them, and they had churches that let them stay in their buildings and let them sleep there and feed them. It really just shows that all parts of a project like this are so important. And their goal for all of this was to help children in poverty. So I love that they had this one goal that unified all of them to help other people. And I thought it was so interesting the way he shared about the Good Samaritan. You know, that's a story that Jesus told. That was a parable that Jesus told. And we've heard that story so many different times. But I'd never thought about the innkeeper as being the best person to care for the man who was hurt. The Good Samaritan did the best he could, and then he passed along the responsibility and helped pay for it. And Compassion International is an organization that does the same thing. It helps us help other people by supporting those local churches because they are the best people to help the children and families that live in their community. So I hope you'll go to rideforcompassion.com and learn all about Rodney's story and his next bike ride coming up. And if you can support that, that would be amazing. And then go to compassion.com and learn more about what it means to sponsor a child and how you and your family could be a part of someone's story. I think that would just be incredible. Well, now it's time for the kids only segment. This is the part of the show where you get to be on the podcast. So I'm excited to introduce you to my friend, Bridget.
Hi, my name is Bridget, and this is my joke. What do boy elephants wear when they go swimming? Trunks.
Thanks, Bridget. Well, I would love to hear your favorite joke, or maybe you have an encouraging quote you like, or maybe you have a Bible verse you really want to share. You can just send those to me through my Facebook or Instagram pages. I'm on Facebook at the Collide Kids Podcast or on Instagram at Collide Kids Pod. I'd also love to hear from you. Come check out my new website, thecollidekidspodcast.wordpress.com, to get more information about the show and show notes and all the information about my guests. And be sure to subscribe and follow this podcast so that new episodes will automatically load each week into whatever podcast app you're using. And don't forget to leave a rating and a review. That really is so helpful for other people to find out about the show. Well, I hope you've enjoyed today's show. Thanks so much for listening. And I hope that you will take some time to check out Compassion International. They have a lot of great ways to help others. And hey, if it's nice outside, maybe you could go ride your bike. Although you do need to ask permission from mom and dad before you try to do a bike ride across the country, okay? So don't tell anyone I told you to do that unless mom and dad say it's okay. Well, in case no one has told you today, let me be the first to remind you that God loves you so much. Thanks for listening.
You don't have to go very far looking for bad news because somehow it just finds you. So finding peace in the chaos can be really difficult, but it doesn't have to be because the River mobile app exists. The River is a Christian music radio station dedicated to playing music to help you get through life's toughest moments or life's happiest moments and everywhere in between. And all from artists who love Jesus and are real people just like you. Listening is easy. You can download it wherever you get apps from. Just search 1049 The River or listen online at riverradio.com. And know that The River is proud to partner with the Collide Kids Podcast.